If you take Nier Automata, strip away the authorship of Yoko Taro, and replace it with a post-apocalyptic, blighted version of Pokémon Zacian, you get Beast of Reincarnation. On a surface level, it is incredibly easy to look at Emma, our stoic protagonist who looks like a knockoff 2B mixed with the visage of Eve from Stellar Blade, and dismiss the entire experience as derivative. In today's gaming discourse, if a game wears its inspirations on its sleeve, it is immediately slapped with the label of mid or creatively bankrupt. Content creators like Mr. Matty Plays will disregard it and say there's other much better games to play, or Mortismal will drop it after 3 chapters and use the Steam achievement unlocker to go on to glaze Dragon Age the Veilguard, writing off 6 years of development time without ever seeing the credits roll. But to call Beast of Reincarnation mid is to entirely miss the point. It is the ultimate passion project. It is the result of developers at Game Freak, a studio practically chained to the financially monumental but creatively rigid Pokémon franchise, finally getting the green light to channel everything they love about Horizon Zero Dawn, Ghost of Tsushima, Nier, and From Software into one cohesive, heartfelt world. It's trying to remind us why we love those games in the first place. The world of 4026 Japan is a masterclass in contrasting environmental storytelling, even if it occasionally stumbles in its execution. The game's central antagonist isn't just a monster, it's the environment itself. The Blight functions as a dark allegory for repressed trauma and suppressed human emotion. Lore reveals that humanity's downfall began when society tried to engineer away all negative feelings, but you can't just delete grief and anger, so it pulled together and rotted the soul and manifested physically as an aggressive parasitic plant life. The game juxtaposes 2 distinct visual identities to tell this story: the wasteland and the forest. The gray ash-covered wastelands represent the unvarnished truth of human failure, places where time has stopped because nothing can rot or move forward. Conversely, the vibrant mystical forests that erupt after defeating a Nushi boss are an illusion. They're the false rebirth built directly on top of organic matter of millions of dead humans. While the game occasionally over-relies on the overgrown concrete jungle aesthetic, and the Crescent Moon City ultimately feels like an underutilized tease that just falls out of the sky at the end, the overarching atmosphere remains incredibly potent. The environmental scaling features towering, decaying structures that completely dwarf the characters, evoking a Fallout-esque retro-futuristic dread. At the center of this blighted world are Emma and Ku. Emma begins the journey as an empty vessel, a transactional tool for a surviving society that views her purely as a lethal weapon. Fitted with a toxic choker, she shares no common ground with normal survivors. Her worldview aligns only with the infected, which leads her to Ku. Their dynamic is the emotional anchor of this game. They don't fight for the abstract, grandiose concept of saving humanity. Humanity threw them away. Instead, they fight for the specific found family they cultivate at their base camp. Away from the hostile wilds and the quiet acoustic warmth of the camp, characters like Kagura and Brad treat Emma as a human and a part of their found family, rather than dehumanizing her like the rest of post-apocalyptic society. This localized love is why Emma and Ku ultimately reject Mikoto's ideal world at the game's climax. Mikoto offers a utopia where the Blightborn will no longer be lonely, but it requires culling anyone unable to withstand the pure strain. Emma and Ku refuse to build their salvation on mass slaughter, breaking the 100-year cycle of the Beast of Reincarnation simply because they want their chosen family to survive. You cannot discuss this game without discussing its creators. Game Freak developed this under their internal Gear Project initiative. Historically, this program birthed smaller quirky titles like Harmonite, Giga Wrecker, and Little Town Hero, games that came and went without shifting the cultural needle. Beast of Reincarnation hit the global zeitgeist differently because of its sheer unbridled ambition. It was a studio leaping from charmy indie side projects to a full-blown 3D action RPG, attempting to stand shoulder to shoulder with the AAA titans. In doing so, they created a brilliant dark reflection of their flagship franchise. In Pokémon, creature companions are universal social glue, and their evolution is a flashy celebration of maturity. In Beast of Reincarnation, Emma and Ku's bond is forged because they are entirely shunned by society. Furthermore, progression is tied to the physical decay. As Ku unlocks more devastating attacks, his model changes to show aggressive crystalline calcification. Game Freak took the creepypasta horror stories of Lavender Town and dragged them into active gameplay. This melancholic tone was perfectly elevated by a soundtrack that channels the Nier Automata. When exploring Dead Wastelands, the instrumentation drops out entirely, leaving a solitary echo-heavy female vocal track that perfectly captures Emma's isolation. Is Beast of Reincarnation highly derivative? Yes. When you swing from tree roots, you'll think of Spider-Man. When you see the rusting digital souls of golems, you'll think Horizon. But derivative does not mean soulless. The reviewers who rush through the first 3 chapters just to label it mid miss the profound emotional payoff that comes from actually completing the journey. Critics like the Night Sky Prince on YouTube, who actually finished the game and gave it an 8 out of 10, understood this. He didn't downplay the borrowed mechanics. He recognized that a game can be a mosaic of other great titles and still deliver a deeply affecting character-driven story. Beast of Reincarnation is the sound of developers breaking free from decades-long mold to make the exact video game they've always wanted to play. It's an enjoyable, beautiful, and emotionally resonant experience. If you're willing to look past the surface level comparisons, you'll find a world that absolutely deserves to be saved. Just give it a chance.